Somewhere inside a locked, climate-controlled vault at Yale University, there is a book that has quietly humiliated the greatest minds in human history, and it has been doing it for over 600 years. Not a supercomputer, not a government codebreaker, not a Nobel Prize-winning linguist. Not even the most advanced artificial intelligence ever built by human hands has been able to read a single sentence from its pages. One sentence. That is all anyone has ever asked for. 600 years. Hundreds of the smartest people who ever lived. Billions of dollars worth of computing power. And the answer is still the same. Silence. Complete, absolute, maddening silence. This is not a legend. This is not a myth passed down around a campfire. This is a real object, a physical book. It has been carbon dated, chemically analyzed, photographically scanned, and studied under electron microscopes. Scientists know the exact decade it was made. They know the region of Italy where the animals were raised, whose skins became its pages. They know the recipe for the ink. They know exactly how many people wrote it, and they still cannot tell you what a single word means. What you are about to hear is the true, fully documented, deeply strange story of the most mysterious book ever created. A story that involves a fugitive revolutionary, a power-mad emperor, a possible secret society, some of the greatest names in the history of human genius, and a language that may have died along with every single person who ever spoke it. Stay with me from beginning to end because I promise you, just when you think this story cannot get any stranger, it does. You are watching the History Chronicle, the channel where history stops being a list of dates and starts being the most compelling thing you have ever heard. If you're new here, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. The community we are building here is for people who want the real stories, the ones that mainstream history glosses over, and the ones that keep researchers awake at 3 in the morning. This is one of those stories. Let's go. To understand why this book matters so much, you first have to understand the man who pulled it out of the darkness, because his story alone is worth a film. Wilfred Voynich was born in 1865 in what is now Lithuania, inside the Russian Empire. He grew up at a time when the people of Poland and the surrounding regions were living under brutal Russian control. No freedom of press, no right to self-governance, no tolerance for anyone who pushed back. Wilfred pushed back hard. As a young man, he became deeply involved in the underground Polish revolutionary movement, working to resist Russian domination at enormous personal risk. He was eventually arrested by Tsarist authorities and sentenced to exile in Siberia, one of the most feared punishments of that era. Siberian exile meant hard labor in brutal cold, thousands of miles from everyone you loved, with no real end in sight. But Wilfred Voynich did not stay. In a story that sounds more like a thriller novel than real life, he escaped. He made his way across the vast Russian landscape, crossed into Western Europe, and eventually arrived in London. Broke, unknown, and starting completely from scratch. He taught himself the rare books trade from the ground up, eventually opening a bookshop on Shaftesbury Avenue that became one of the most respected rare book dealers in England. He married a brilliant Irish woman named Ethel Lillian Boole, herself a published novelist, mathematician's daughter, and remarkable woman, and together they built a life defined by intellect, passion, and the relentless pursuit of rare and beautiful things. So when Wilfred Voynich arrived at the Villa Mondragone in the summer of 1912, he was not a naive collector stumbling through old boxes. He was a man with sharper instincts than almost anyone in his field, a man who had survived Siberia, outwitted an empire, and spent decades training his eyes to recognize the extraordinary hiding inside the ordinary. The villa itself was extraordinary in all the wrong ways, grand and decaying at the same time, the kind of place where beautiful things went to slowly fall apart. The Jesuit monks who owned it were in serious financial trouble and had quietly decided to sell portions of their private library to raise money without making any public announcement. It was a discreet, almost secretive arrangement. Voynich moved through the collection with the patience of a man who understood that the best finds are rarely sitting on the top shelf. He worked through box after box, crate after crate, religious manuscripts, historical chronicles, theological texts, valuable in their own right perhaps, but nothing that made his pulse quicken. And then, near the bottom of an old wooden chest, wrapped in a piece of rough parchment, he found a small book. He picked it up, he unwrapped it, he opened it, and the world he thought he understood shifted. There was no title, no author, no date, no dedication page, no opening line, no single familiar symbol that he could anchor to anything he had ever seen in 40 years of handling books. Every page was covered in neat, flowing, confident handwriting, written in an alphabet that matched nothing in any language catalogue anywhere in the world. Not Latin, not Greek, not Arabic or Hebrew or Persian or Sanskrit, or any of the hundreds of obscure European dialects that Voynich had spent his career learning to recognize. The script had the feel of European writing from the 14th or 15th century, with rounded, graceful letter forms that suggested a trained and careful hand. But the letters themselves, every single one of them, were completely foreign. Between the lines of text were illustrations, and the illustrations were almost more baffling than the writing. The largest section of the book appeared to be a kind of herbal guide, page after page of plants drawn in soft greens, blues, and browns, with roots and stems and flowers carefully rendered in the style of medieval botanical manuscripts. Except none of the plants were real. Not a single one could be matched to any species documented in any botanical record from any part of the world. Some had roots that curled and twisted like human limbs or coiled snakes. Some had flowers that combined petals, leaves, and stems from completely different plant families, as if someone had spliced 3 separate species together and drawn the result. Botanists who examined these images spent months searching for matches in global plant databases and found nothing. The plants in this book do not grow anywhere on Earth. They never have. Then came pages filled with astronomical diagrams, circular charts covered in stars and suns and moons, with labels in that same unreadable script. Some of the diagrams show familiar symbols from the Western zodiac, Pisces, Taurus, Aries, but surrounding them are figures and text that match no known astronomical system from medieval Europe, the Islamic world, or ancient Greece. The star maps do not correspond to the actual night sky. The constellations are arranged in ways that do not reflect what any human being with naked eyes could have observed from anywhere on the planet. And then, the section that has disturbed researchers more than any other part of the book. There are the people. Dozens of illustrations show women, some of them clearly pregnant. They are submerged in pools of green liquid, their faces calm and serene, sometimes connected to each other by elaborate networks of tubes, pipes, channels, and containers that look startlingly like plumbing diagrams or engineering schematics. The level of mechanical detail in these drawings is not supposed to exist in a 15th century manuscript. Running water systems of this complexity were not part of medieval European life, and yet here they are, drawn with obvious intention by someone who clearly had a specific concept in mind that they wanted to communicate. Near the end of the book, the illustrations thin out and the text takes over completely dense columns of writing unbroken by images, running page after page like the final chapters of a book where the author is racing to get everything down before time runs out. Voynich closed the book. He knew, in the way that a person who has dedicated their life to recognizing rare things just knows, that he was holding something that had no equal in the recorded history of human civilization. He bought the entire collection. He brought the manuscript back to London. He spent the rest of his life trying to understand what he had found. He shared copies with the greatest linguists and mathematicians of his era. He wrote letters to scholars across Europe and America. He talked about the manuscript constantly, obsessively, the way a person talks about something that has gotten under their skin so deep they cannot think about anything else. Wilfred Voynich died in 1930, 18 years after finding the book, without ever reading a single word. His wife Ethel, the novelist, inherited it. She held on to it for years, keeping it close the way you keep something that was deeply important to the person you love. When Ethel died in 1960, the manuscript passed to a colleague and was eventually sold to a rare book dealer named Hans Kraus, who tried for years to find a buyer, asking the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's money. No institution wanted to pay that much for a book no one could read. In 1969, Kraus donated it to Yale University, where it remains today, catalogued as Voynich MS 408, the most studied and least understood object in the library's entire collection. When scientists finally got serious access to the manuscript in the modern era, the very first question they wanted to answer was the most basic one. Is this thing actually old? Or is it a clever fake? The answer came from the University of Arizona's radiocarbon dating laboratory, which in the early 2000s received 4 tiny fragments cut from different pages of the manuscript. The results were definitive. The animal skins used to make the parchment were prepared between 1404 and 1438, the early decades of the Italian Renaissance. This was a genuine artifact from the same era that produced Donatello, Brunelleschi, and the early writings of Leonardo da Vinci's teachers. No forgery, no modern fabrication. 600 years old, confirmed by hard science. The chemical analysis that followed was equally conclusive. Scientists using X-ray fluorescence and Raman spectroscopy examined the ink and every pigment used in every illustration. The iron gall ink used for the text was consistent with 15th century European production methods. The mineral-based paints, azurite blue, copper green, iron oxide red, were all exactly what a skilled artist working in the early 1400s would have used. There were no synthetic compounds, no binding agents, nothing that post-dated the medieval period. Even more remarkable, the paint was applied on top of existing dried ink lines, meaning the illustrations and the text were added in distinct, sequential phases, exactly the way a real manuscript workshop would have operated. Crucially, carbon isotope analysis confirmed that the text and illustrations were applied to the parchment very shortly after the skins were prepared. The pages were not blank old parchment that someone filled in later. This book was created all at once in the early 15th century by people who were alive in a world of plague, war, exploration, and religious revolution. But the single most haunting discovery made by physical examination is this: the handwriting never stops to think. Every medieval manuscript ever written shows some evidence of the writer's process: small corrections, crossed-out letters, ink blots from a hesitating quill, guidelines scored into the parchment with a stylus to keep lines straight, the natural signs of human effort. The Voynich Manuscript has almost none of these. The text flows continuously, rapidly, and without apparent error from the first page to the last. Researchers who have studied historical handwriting professionally for decades say the fluency of the script points to one conclusion: the person writing was not translating, not encoding, not carefully constructing something letter by letter. They were writing the way a native speaker writes, from pure automatic habit, without conscious effort. They knew this language. They lived inside it. It was theirs. Now let us talk about who might have created it, because this part of the story is where history, romance, obsession, and genius all collide in the most extraordinary way. The manuscript's earliest documented owner in the historical record is Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor, who ruled from Prague from 1576 to 1612. Rudolf was one of the most fascinating and deeply strange rulers Europe has ever produced. He essentially abandoned the day-to-day business of governing an empire because he was far more interested in what he considered the real work: the pursuit of hidden knowledge. He filled his private chambers in Prague Castle with telescopes, alchemical furnaces, mechanical automata, exotic animals, paintings by Arcimboldo, and manuscripts that promised to reveal the secrets of the universe. He hired the astronomers Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler, 2 of the greatest scientific minds of the age, and gave them rooms in his court not because he wanted accurate star charts, but because he believed the stars held personal messages meant for him. Rudolf was, in the language of modern psychology, a man with severe obsessive tendencies and recurring episodes of what we would today call depression or bipolar disorder. He retreated from reality into his collection the way some people retreat into drink. He was brilliant, unstable, generous to artists and scientists, terrified of death, and completely convinced that somewhere inside his vast and growing library of arcane texts there was a formula: for the philosopher's stone, for immortality, for dominion over nature itself. He reportedly paid 600 gold ducats for the Voynich Manuscript. To calibrate that number, 1 gold ducat in early 17th century Prague could pay a skilled craftsman's wages for roughly a week. 600 ducats was an enormous, almost incomprehensible sum for a single book, the equivalent today of somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 in cash, handed over for a book with no title, no author, and no readable text. Rudolph was convinced the book had once belonged to Roger Bacon, the 13th century English friar and philosopher who was arguably the most scientifically advanced mind of the medieval era. Bacon wrote about flying machines, mechanically powered ships, telescopes, and explosive powder centuries before any of them existed. His contemporaries were so alarmed by his ideas that he spent years imprisoned by his own religious order. Supporters of the Bacon theory argued that he had deliberately encoded his most dangerous discoveries in a private language to protect them from church persecution. The carbon dating destroyed this theory completely. The parchment is dated to the early 1400s. Bacon died in 1292, more than a century before the manuscript's materials were even prepared. A letter found in the Prague archives written in 1665 by Johannes Marcus Marci, rector of Prague University, and a man of considerable intellectual standing, was sent along with the manuscript to Athanasius Kircher, the famous Jesuit scholar and one of the greatest polyglots of the 17th century. Kircher had spent his career deciphering ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and translating texts from dozens of languages. If anyone could crack the Voynich script, the thinking went, it was him. Kircher's response to that letter, if he ever wrote one, has never been found. We do not know if he tried. We do not know if he walked away immediately. We only know that the book remained unread. The next great candidate for authorship was a man named Jacobus de Tepanik, also known as Jakub Sinopius, who served as Rudolph's personal physician and managed the imperial garden of medicinal herbs in Prague. His name was discovered on the first page of the manuscript under ultraviolet light, hidden beneath a layer of chemicals that had been used to obscure it. His connection to medicinal plants seemed to explain the extensive botanical sections. His access to Rudolph's library explained how his name got on the book, but forensic analysis showed that his signature was added to the manuscript significantly after the book itself was written. He was a reader, or an owner, not the creator. And then came the theory that genuinely electrified the popular imagination for a time. Leonardo da Vinci. Researchers studying the astronomical section noticed that exactly 15 female figures were arranged around the symbol for Aries, the ram, the first sign of the zodiac. April 15th is the birthday of Leonardo da Vinci. 15 figures around Aries. Some analysts saw this as an encoded self-portrait, a signature hidden in the stars by a man who loved hidden signatures. Leonardo famously wrote in mirror script from right to left using his left hand. The drawing style in the manuscript, while rough, appears to have been made by someone left-handed. Leonardo was left-handed his entire life. It is romantic. It is the kind of theory that makes you want it to be true. But the art breaks the spell. Leonardo da Vinci's anatomical drawings are among the most precise images ever made by a human hand. Studies of muscle and bone so accurate that medical students still reference them today. The drawings in the Voynich Manuscript are, by comparison, simplistic and almost childlike. The proportions of the human figures are awkward. The plants, though detailed, lack the technical mastery that defines everything Leonardo touched. No serious art historian who spent time with both Leonardo's known work and the Voynich illustrations has found the connection credible. The most recent and perhaps most sobering forensic finding is this. The manuscript was written by at least 5 distinct individuals. Yale paleographer Lisa Fagan Davis confirmed in recent years the careful analysis of letter formation pressure patterns and stylistic variation across different sections reveals at least 5 separate scribes, all writing in the same language, all with the same fluency, all contributing to a single unified work. This was not alone eccentric. This was not one isolated genius working in a private obsession. This was organized, this was collective, this was a community of people who shared a language that they apparently felt the need to protect from the outside world with extraordinary seriousness. The codebreakers entered this story with supreme confidence and left it, one by one, in various stages of intellectual exhaustion. During World War I and World War II, some of the greatest cryptanalysts ever trained turned their skills on the Voynich Manuscript during downtime from their war work. These were people who routinely broke multi-layered military ciphers that entire intelligence agencies had designed to be unbreakable, people whose work directly changed the outcomes of battles and saved thousands of lives. The manuscript beat them all. William Friedman is the name that towers above all others in the history of code breaking. He broke Japan's purple cipher, the most sophisticated diplomatic encryption system the Japanese government had ever created, giving the United States access to Tokyo's highest-level communications throughout World War II. He ran the U.S. Army's Signals Intelligence Service. He is, without any serious argument, one of the most gifted cryptanalysts who ever lived. He spent 30 years, roughly the last third of his entire professional life, working on the Voynich Manuscript. He organized a study group of fellow expert cryptanalysts who met periodically to share observations and test theories. He covered pages of private notebooks with analysis, annotations, and increasingly frustrated observations. He died in 1969, the same year the manuscript arrived at Yale, without having decoded a single word. His wife, Elizabeth Friedman, herself one of the most accomplished codebreakers in American history, who had dismantled major rum-running operations during Prohibition and broken Nazi spy networks during World War II, worked alongside him on the manuscript for years. She could not crack it either. When modern computing arrived, the optimism returned briefly. Surely a machine that could process millions of character combinations per second would find the pattern that human minds had missed. The computers found something, but it was not a translation. It was a law. Zipf's law is a mathematical principle first described by the American linguist George Zip in the 1930s. It states that in any natural human language, regardless of culture, geography, or era, the frequency of any word is inversely proportional to its rank in the frequency table. The most common word appears roughly twice as often as the second most common word, 3 times as often as the third, and so on. This pattern holds true in English, in Mandarin, in ancient Sumerian, in medieval Latin, in every documented human language without exception. It is a kind of mathematical fingerprint that belongs exclusively to real, organically developed language that grew inside a community of human beings over generations of actual use. The Voynich text obeys Zipf's law precisely. No 15th century forger could have engineered this. The mathematics to describe it did not exist until the 20th century. You cannot fake this pattern without knowing it exists and understanding statistics at a professional level. The manuscript was made in 1404. Zipf published his work in 1935. The gap is over 5 centuries. That statistical signature tells us with as much certainty as linguistics can offer that the Voynich text is a real language, or at minimum a system with the deep internal structure of a real language. Information is encoded in those pages. Meaning is there. We are simply on the wrong side of a wall that no tool we have built so far can break through. Computational analysis also revealed that the manuscript is written in 2 slightly different versions of the same language, what researchers have called Voynich A and Voynich B. The botanical and pharmaceutical sections use one set of word patterns and letter combinations. The astronomical and biological sections use a slightly different set, as if 2 different dialect speakers from the same language community contributed to different parts of the book. This further supports the evidence of multiple authors and a genuine living language community, rather than a single person inventing symbols in isolation. In January 2026, independent researcher and computational linguist Dr. Gerard Cheshire, who had previously and controversially claimed a full translation, was superseded by new work from a different team, which demonstrated that a historically documented encoding method called card-and-grill could theoretically reproduce the statistical properties found in the Voynich text. A card-and-grill is a physical tool, a grid with holes cut into it that was placed over a table of syllables, allowing a writer to rapidly generate text that followed specific patterns without constructing it word by word. This is significant. If the grill theory is correct, the text may not be a natural language at all. It may be an extremely sophisticated cipher, one designed specifically to mimic the statistical properties of real language in order to resist exactly the kind of frequency analysis that every codebreaker since the Renaissance has tried to apply. But even this theory cannot tell us what the book says. A grill tells us the method. It does not give us the table of syllables the author used. Without that table, which has never been found, and may have been deliberately destroyed. The text remains unreadable forever. And then there is the heartbreaking theory, the one that has no villain, no code, no solvable puzzle at the center of it. What if the Voynich Manuscript is not a cipher at all? What if it is simply a book written in a language that no longer has any living speakers? A language that was never written down anywhere else, never borrowed into any neighboring tongue, never left a trace in any other archive because the community that spoke it was simply too small, too isolated, or too completely destroyed by the catastrophes of the 15th century to leave any other evidence of its existence. History is full of languages that disappeared without a record. The Black Death alone, which killed between 30 and 60% of Europe's population in the 14th century, erased entire villages, entire extended family networks, entire local cultures that had developed over centuries. The warfare and religious persecution of the 15th century finished off many of the communities the plague had only wounded. If the people who wrote this book spoke a language that lived and died entirely within one small isolated community, a valley community in the Alps perhaps, or a cluster of villages in a region of northern Italy with the characteristic architectural details in the manuscript point, then there would be no parallel text to compare it to, no Rosetta Stone, no bilingual inscription that gives us the bridge between their world and ours. The door would be permanently, irrevocably closed. In that case, the Voynich Manuscript is not a puzzle with a solution. It is a memorial. The last surviving voice of a people whose entire world fit inside a valley, whose language lived and died without ever crossing a mountain range, and who left behind this one extraordinary book as the only proof they were ever here at all. The unnamed woman bathing calmly in those green pools. She had a name once, in a language we will never learn. The person who drew her knew that name. 5 scribes wrote this book together, perhaps in the same room, perhaps by candlelight, perhaps aware that what they were recording was precious and needed to be preserved. They had no way of knowing that the world that made their language meaningful would vanish. They had no way of knowing that 600 years later, a man would sit in a climate-controlled library in Connecticut, staring at their careful handwriting and feeling the unbridgeable distance between their world and his. Today, the manuscript sits at Yale, Beinecke MS 408, in conditions designed to ensure it survives another 600 years. Temperature-controlled, humidity-controlled, protected from light. The original is handled only by a tiny number of scholars, under strict supervision, wearing cotton gloves. For the rest of us, Yale has published a complete high-resolution digital scan, freely available online. On any given day, amateur researchers, retired professors, linguistic students, obsessive puzzlers, and curious teenagers from every country in the world are staring at those same pages. Pages that Wilfred Voynich first opened in a dusty villa outside Rome in 1912, and asking the same question that has never been answered. What does it say? More than a century of searching has given us this. We know the animal whose skin became the page. We know the mineral that became the ink. We know the region of Italy where it was most likely made, the number of hands that wrote it, the approximate decade of its creation, and the mathematical laws its language follows. We have thrown everything we have at it, the best human minds, the fastest machines, the most advanced analytical tools our civilization has ever produced, and the book has not moved an inch. There is something almost unbearably human about that. We are a species that put footprints on the moon. We mapped the human genome, rebuilt machines that beat world chess champions, and compose music and generate images from pure description. And a small, water-stained book from 1420 is still beating us. But here is what I want to leave you with, because I think this is the part that matters most. Every few years, someone announces they have finally cracked it. A professor submits a paper claiming the first decoded words. A researcher posts a video with a confident smile and the color-coded chart. And every time, without exception, the wider scientific community finds the error, exposes the gap in the logic, and the manuscript goes quiet again. And I wonder if that is not the most important thing it teaches us. We live in a world that is almost entirely transparent now. Every fact is searchable. Every secret eventually leaks. Every private message has a record somewhere. We have become so accustomed to answers arriving instantly that we have quietly started to believe that every question has one, that mystery is just a temporary state, something that exists only until someone smart enough comes along. The Voynich Manuscript is the universe's quiet, firm correction to that belief. Some things are sealed. Some voices are gone. Some doors have no keys because the person who made them took the key with them into a silence so complete that no amount of intelligence or technology will ever fully reach it. That should not make you feel defeated. It should make you feel something rarer. Genuine humility. A sense of wonder at how much was real and living and meaningful in this world long before any of us arrived, and how much of it slipped away before anyone thought to save it. This book will probably never be fully decoded, not because we are not smart enough, but because the world that made it meaningful no longer exists. And mourning that, sitting with that loss, really feeling it, might be the closest any of us will ever get to actually hearing what it says. If that kind of thinking, the kind that makes history feel urgent and alive and achingly real, is what brought you here today, then you are exactly the right person for this channel. Subscribe to the History Chronicle right now. Share this video with someone who loves a mystery that actually matters. Drop a comment below. I genuinely want to know, do you think the Voynich Manuscript is a coded language, a dead language, or something we do not have a category for yet? Tell me what you think. The rabbit hole is deep here, and we are only just getting started.